Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Thursday, April 21st, 2022 Board of Education meeting for the Lincoln Way Community High School District to order, 210 to order. If you could please stand for the pledge. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Stone, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Janik.
Here.
Ms. Janice Doyle. Here. Mr. Kirking. Here. Mr. Lacine. Mr. Lucetti. Here. Mrs. Stokes. Here. Mr. Kostick.
And I'll be serving as President Pro Tem tonight in President Kostick's absence. For public comment, we have two individuals signed up. First on the list is Jeff Hassel. Just to remind you, we have 5 minutes per person, so the floor is yours.
Thank you for your time. I have a child at Lincoln Way Central that receives special education services, including collaborative classes. We were made aware the other day that Lincoln Way is eliminating collaborative classes. That was confirmed today by one of my son's teachers, that they're eliminating all but the core classes. This is very disappointing to parents that rely on this for their children. It provides a vital support system for students, forcing them to, and this decision is forcing them to make a decision either to take a lower level class or struggle through gen ed without this support. Collaboration helps to ensure children with learning disabilities to get a free appropriate public education in regular classroom setting, including specialized instruction that they may need. This allows students to be educated in the least restrictive environment, which is a lawful requirement. With the help of collaborative teachers who help ensure understanding and provide adaptations and modifications, these students can be successful in a gen ed setting. Additionally, a gen ed setting is a far better option to help them prepare for a more competitive college environment. By keeping core classes in the collaborative curriculum, it clearly indicates that the school agrees and acknowledges that these supports are important and needed. So I'm not really sure why this concept would not be continued to be extended beyond the core classes. I understand that that the teachers don't necessarily make a decision in that, and that's why we're addressing the board today. So I have a few questions to ask. First of all, how is this decision made? Next question, why are collaborative courses why are they being eliminated? Third question, what data or metrics were used to make this decision? Fourth question, what other collaborative courses beyond U.S. history are being eliminated? Fifth question, should we anticipate other collaborative courses being eliminated beyond the 2022-2023 school year? And my sixth question would be, and this is probably for the school as well, how does an instructional setting differ from gen ed settings? It's not really explained to parents. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up, we have Colleen Hassel.
Good evening. Thank you for letting us talk tonight. I am Jeff's wife, and I have a child who has special education services in a gen ed setting. And it has come recently to our attention that these are getting eliminated. Unfortunately, as a special education parent, I was not aware of this. I found out through the grapevine, and that's how it was presented to me of another parent whose child is in special education. According to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it was amended in 1997 to clearly emphasize the need to educate students with disabilities in the general general education setting whenever is possible. Students with disabilities receiving special education services are being pulled out of their natural learning environment to receive services at a very high rate. This segregates the population of students and reduces their opportunity for exposure to grade-level curriculum, as well as learning alongside same-age non-disabled peers. Not only does this impact the academic achievement rate, but it can also impact students academically and socially. Keeping the least restrictive environment in mind, what inclusive teaching strategies can be implemented to provide services and keep students in a natural learning environment? Co-teaching is also designed to provide extra support for the general education teachers. In my short amount of time that I've had to research this, it's a lot. When teachers, general education teachers, have special education students, they're far more likely to have burnout than they do without a collaborative class, without another special education teacher with them. And I'm sorry, I'm just a little flustered here. Many teachers reported that they were not required to take courses in working with students with disabilities before being in a gen ed setting, and we all know that the rates of children with autism have been going up, so that means a lot more children are in a general education setting. So my other question is, what training do our general ed teachers have in disabilities and special needs of the students they are teaching? According to the National Center for Learning Disabilities Research, fewer than 10 states have specific coursework requirements for teaching students with mild to moderate learning disabilities. The report's definition of mild to moderate learning disabilities includes dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, ADD, ADHD, processing disorders, or other language-based learning disabilities. This definition does not include students with autism spectrum disorders, oppositional defiant disorders, or unrelated emotional disorders. When teachers say, I'm sorry, I'm just flustered because I'm so passionate about what's going on. If 1 in 5 students have learning and attention issues in the U.S., how are we being able to make sure that they pass the courses, are successful, and graduate high school and go on to a trade school, a secondary education, stuff like that? What are the general education teachers required to know about special needs? And from rumor has it that a few other school districts have done away with collaborative teaching. So what they do is put a paraprofessional in place of the teacher. Unfortunately, paraprofessionals do not have a teaching certificate most often. They do not know how to differentiate the curriculum, and they do not know how to give testing, stuff like that. Also, rumor has it that Plainfield tried this and removed the co-taught classes, and scores went down. And then my last question is, when was the last time administration observed a collaborative classroom and saw what is going on between the special education teacher and a general education teacher? And lastly, I'm finally done after this question, I am requesting that there be a special education parent as a liaison to the school board. I think that would be helpful. A lot of us parents have a lot going on, and to run for a school board position would require a ton of things that we can't give, but to have a liaison relationship between the school board and the parents would be phenomenal. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, we'll be moving on to the consent agenda. We have the approval of the regular meeting minutes of March 17th, 2022, approval of the closed meeting minutes of March 17th, 2022, approval of the payrolls of March 18th, 2022, April 5th, 2022, and April 20th, 2022, personnel reports, out-of-state travel, IHSA membership renewal, and approval of consent agenda items. Does anyone want any of these? Ron Burgundy. Does anyone want any of these pulled individually? All right, hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? All right, Linda, can you open the vote?
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Next up, we have, under action items, presentation of invoices for March 18th, 2022 through April 21st, 2022.
Motion to approve the invoices in the amount of $2,734,148.88, dated April 21st, 2022.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Any questions? All right, hearing none. Linda, can you open the vote?
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Next up, under action items, we have the treasurer's report for March 2022.
For the month ending March 31st, receipts totaled $4.1 million and expenses were $8.1 million. It's typical this time of year, no property tax revenues collected. Total cash balance at the close of the month was $19.5 million. Year-to-date, in terms of our budget, approximately 59.1% and 72.6% of budgeted operating revenues and expenditures have been realized, and in comparison, that was 58.8 and 72.6 this time last year. When I presented this treasurer's report last month, we were lagging a little bit behind in federal grant revenue reimbursements. We have caught up substantially on those. We got $1.2 million in IDEA and ESSER reimbursements. And then in terms of expenses, recorded expenses are tracking right on budget. But I want to talk for just a second about the benefits claims. They do remain high, and some of those additional claims are not yet recorded expenses as they're sitting in that liability, as I mentioned last month. Our bill did come down. If you'll remember, last month's medical claim bill was $1.3+ million. It's come down this month, was $932,000, but that's still outpacing our premiums substantially. So we did meet with STUM. We have several catastrophic claims have been recorded over the last 6 to 8 months. It is quite possible that we hit both individual and aggregate stop losses by the end of this calendar year, but that likely won't impact this fiscal year. So that would be something we'd be tracking for fiscal year 23, since those claims are on a calendar year basis. We do know, and I'll speak more about this in the amended budget, but both in planning for FY23 and building into the 5-year financial forecast, we do need to have a more conservative on-the-books general ledger budget for medical insurance premiums. So that's something that will be increasing in future years. For the investment report, while still low relative to the past decade, our blended investment rate is 0.27%. That's still quite small, but it's triple what it was just a month ago. So we continue working with PMA, and we're pursuing appropriate options. As soon as tax revenues hit this spring, we'll make some investments through the end of the calendar year. Cash flow, again, I mentioned those grant reimbursements. We had a positive cash variance of $1.7 million, and that's due to the grants coming in this month. So they're back on track with prior fiscal years at this time. Net cash balance is $3.7 million higher than at this point last year. And as I said, is $19.5 million all in. Looking ahead, again, no tax revenues expected for April, so we will again have expenses outpacing revenues. I anticipate if historical cash flow trends are similar, we'll be at about $15 million at the close of April, and for comparison, the same point in the prior fiscal year was $12.1 million. Happy to take any questions if you have them.
Any questions?
For the premiums being paid in, what was the increase we had for this calendar year?
7% premium increase.
And when do we set 2023?
We'll set it probably September, October. Yeah, September, October, we'll have conversations and make a decision. Now, I will say premiums went up 7%, but we also moved to a 4-tier system, so we had to control some of the family premiums. That plays a role, and I'll speak a little bit. Sorry. No, sorry. About the breakdown for the insurance and the different pieces that have contributed to that.
And for the investments, are we limited to FDIC insured accounts, or could you invest in a 3-month treasury?
We can do 3 months, we can do 6 months, we have some CD options. I was just working with Janine in our bookkeeping office and PMA to look at, right now, we don't have a ton of extra money, Chris, until the tax revenue comes in, but we can look at CDs, we can look at treasuries and some options, but I'm pretty conservative about where I make those decisions, and right now, leaving it in some of our money market and bank accounts has actually been better in terms of rates than some of the investments. We were getting CDs with 0.04, because they're almost all. So.
A 3-month.
Turn your mic on.
A 3-month treasury is at, like a 3-month treasury is at 1%.
Right, so when we get this, what we're projecting right now is about 1.1% is where we think we'll have for a 6-month, and that's what I'm looking at. Now, that might go up between now and May, June, when we have some of that money.
It will go up.
So, come June, when we'll have option to do a 6-month through December before the next big bond payment's due in January, that's kind of my timeline that I'm looking at, and our last quote was 1.1. And to your point, Joe, I think it'll go up.
And not to state the obvious, but I mean, you can ladder into that. I mean, so that you've always got monies coming due every month rather than just buying bullet after bullet 6 months out. I mean, if you started that now, even with when you're at almost at the low point, because this is unique. I shouldn't say it's unique. We haven't been here in a decade where they've telegraphed that the Fed overnight rate's probably going to go to 3.5 is what most banks are looking at. And so you're talking 50 basis points, just a steady march for the rest of the year. And when now that we've got money, and we're talking about things like the benefits,
Sure.
this is the time to lean in. And with treasuries, we're not talking about anything with risk, except I'm sure Rich will bring up Bitcoin later, but because he's a big Bitcoin guy. But just keep that in mind, because Chris is absolutely right. Even on a 90-day, you're over 1 on U.S. Treasuries right now.
Yeah, I mean, because technically the Fed has really only raised rates 25 basis points, but they've telegraphed it so well. The treasuries right now, and again, I'm talking like minimal risk, like laddering out to 6 months, is banks aren't keeping up like they would normally, just because it's been telegraphed. So I just think it's just something to monitor and look at.
It's great feedback, thank you.
I want to go back to the benefits just for a minute. So I want to make sure I understand. We've got a little bit of, this stuff ebbs and flows, I get it. But the disconnect is a timing disconnect that we run on the June 30 to June 30 budget, but we set these premiums on a calendar year.
Correct.
And the stop losses are on a calendar year.
That's correct.
So right now, we're kind of in the middle of the storm, and we don't get a chance to really look at anything or have our breakers hit until later in the year.
Yeah, the problem in terms of this fiscal year, Joe, the early 2021 was okay. Things started to really ramp up in terms of claims in the last 3 or 4 months of 2021. If we had had that pace the entire year, we would have hit the stop loss.
Right.
But unfortunately, we didn't. So in terms of this fiscal year, that's the first 6 months of this fiscal year. So we had to deal with that, right?
So you're helping, yeah, because I didn't formulate my question actually completely correct. And the stop losses are on a true calendar year, January to December, not a rolling 12 months. So a bad 4 months at the end of 1 year and a bad 4 months at the beginning of another year create almost the perfect storm of where you're going to have to eat it until.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, and to your point, Joe, that setting of the rates
if you're experiencing it prior to the start of the new year that you set the rate, but once again, this was a perfect storm where we went up 7%, we've still been exceeding that point. So to your point, the stop loss plus, you know, the rate setting had occurred, and then the catastrophic losses even accelerated after that January 1st date, yes.
Is Strom able to tell, because I mean, there's the catastrophic, right, that's unpredictable for the most part, but like the more kind of elective surgeries, and can we see if that was like really front-loaded into the, or back-loaded in these past year from the prior 2 years? I mean, can you see that type of detail?
Yeah, the answer is yes. Of course, not knowing some information because of HIPAA and different things like that, but just in terms of quantity of claims, size of claims, and I speak to that a little bit in my budget amendment piece later about the insurance, is we have seen small claims go up, the quantity of small claims go up substantially, and that's, although not definitive, Chris, it's likely that during the 2 years of COVID, people were putting off certain things that were elective, and now we're getting bombarded with it. And then secondarily, in terms of large claims, and again, it's later in my memo, so I'm doing this from memory, but I think it was like $83,000, $84,000 was the average large claim expense 2 years ago, and now it's $115,000 to $120,000 per claim. So it's quantity and what's occurring, the cost has gone up substantially.
But I'm going to agree with Chris to the extent that we're going to have to push the provider or our vendor here, because not only was it delayed because of COVID, but deferred when it finally was identified, actually increased the expenditure associated with it. For example, if you didn't go in
Agreed.
for,
I agree.
I'll pick on myself, a colonoscopy because of the COVID environment, and then if you'd have gone in on a regular basis, something preventative would have truly been preventative rather than, oops, now it's reactive. That's what everybody's seeing over and over again. That's where we're gonna have to push these guys to kind of go in this hard and find out, is this truly a blip because of a pandemic-related scenario, or is this now the bar is here and this is what we're gonna have to ride, and for what extended period of time?
Sure.
Because now we're riding into the storm on our own for the most part, so.
Yep.
Okay.
100% agree.
And then a number of the procedures were not because people waited, it's because they stopped doing certain procedures, so people didn't have an option.
Yeah,
People didn't
I
have
think it's a combination for sure. Yeah, some people might have wanted to move forward and they just couldn't. Yep.
Any other questions? All right. Do we have a motion to accept the treasurer's report? Do we have a second? Linda, can you open the vote?
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, next up, we have the student activities report for March 2022.
Student activities report is in your backup material for your review. The total student activity fund balance is $2,118,552 with revenues of $314,447, expenditures of $270,536. We had one account still in the negative, but it was back to positive at the time of this memo. So currently, there are no activities in the negative. I ask you to approve the student activity account summary as presented.
Do I have a motion to approve the student activities report? Do I have a second? Linda, can you please open the vote?
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Worried about that one for a second. Next up, we have the tentative amended fiscal year 2022 budget.
All right, so there's a lot of information in this memo. I promise I will not read it verbatim. I will hit the highlights, and then, of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask along the way or at the end. This is being presented this month for a few different reasons, but primarily, just so you know, we do not have 30 days in between May and June. And just like the typical budget in the fall, is that this tentative amended budget will be placed on public display for 30 days. And so that's why it's being presented here. Just a little bit of a reminder, we had an all-funds surplus of $7.8 million in the original budget. Again, that's all funds, and so in compliance with board guidance, we had a $2.9 million operating surplus, which is 3% of expenses. Since that adoption, obviously, we just talked about the medical insurance claims and the impact that those have had. The board also chose to abate and the transfer amounts that we needed to move into debt service changed, and that $550,000 we reallocated to capital. So that's another reason for the budget amendment. And then a third piece is in collaboration with our auditors. Certain account functions need to be adjusted just to maintain consistency with administrative costs. There's a certain part of the state budget form that pulls out certain functions, and we worked with them, and they suggested an amendment last fall. So because of those items, a formal budget amendment needs to be completed, and obviously doing that now will better help us plan for fiscal year 23 and the 5-year financial forecast. Revenues by fund in the amended budget are higher in every area except debt service. Expenditures are higher across the operating funds, as can be seen on page 3 of this memo. Again, primarily due to medical insurance, which is why the largest changes occur in education and transportation. That's where most of the employees' claims have occurred. Other expenses have increased as well, due in part to inflation, cost of fuel, natural gas. Budgeted salaries went up in education, but down in transportation. Purchased services in transportation have increased. We have seen a pretty notable uptick in special education transportation costs this year, and that is related to the bus driver shortage. We have been using a third-party vendor, which of course comes with a higher cost point to it, and so that's something that we're looking at in terms of operations for the future. Budgeted supplies increased in education, but we're down in transportation. And then, contrary to the special ed transportation, Object 600, which is tuition, dues, and fees, that has decreased by roughly $480,000. We had a pretty conservative budget for special education private facility tuition costs, and we've been able to lower that budget for the current year. Moving forward, if you take a look at page 4, what I tried to capture for all of you is kind of the most noteworthy revenue changes, both increases and decreases. For example, on page 4, at the bottom table, you'll notice CPPRT, our original budget was $620,000. We've actually received $1.3 million. And so that's a positive, that's more revenue to help offset those insurance claims. Transportation fees, we have moved upwards as well. And then refund of prior year expenditures is always difficult to budget because we don't know what will come in and when, but we've received some of those. Moving on to page 5, and this, Chris, is where I said I would elaborate a little bit on the medical insurance expenses. I'm being conservative, and I'm hoping that we come in better than this. But I've increased the medical insurance expenses, that liability that I mentioned. If claims continue at that kind of crazy pace they've been going at the end of the fiscal year when that liability has to hit our books and we have to record that as an expense for the claims paid, I've increased the medical insurance budget by over $2 million, and that's how we're trending. Now, several reasons for that. First, Kelly and I have done some work on our budget, and we believe in terms of the actual general ledger budget, which is just the premiums portion, if we had a regular typical year and we didn't increase premiums along the way, that would be one thing. But with increasing premiums and any outpacing of claims, we believe we need to increase it about $600,000, and we've factored that in for FY23. As I mentioned earlier, the small claims increased dramatically. Cost per claimant has gone up. Prescription costs as well have increased. One prescription alone, some of these where there's not a generic brand, costs have gone up 10%. So from 20 to 21. And so just for comparison's sake, dollars, that's $220,000 extra money just on a single prescription across our group. And then while it's truly difficult to quantify, and Joe, I made a note, we'll continue to push STEM. We've had a number of conversations with them to try and isolate. It's difficult to quantify the impact of COVID, but we know and have spoken with a couple of different brokers about the costs associated with that. And just as all of you know, sitting at the table, doctors are now requiring a COVID test appointment prior to scheduling surgery. So that cost has to get baked in somewhere. We've had a number of conversations as an administrative team about that as well. Moving on to the final page, I won't go line item by line item on these other expense changes, but contractual maintenance and repairs and O&M is up just because of the chiller at East. We've talked about natural gas costs. Mr. Kirkin, you mentioned that last month. And then a couple of reductions. Our printer copier budget has reduced, and then ABM, our custodial cleaning company, we've reduced that budget because they've been short-staffed, so those expenses will come in under. That's a lot of information. That was about as rapid fire as I could go. But what this now means is instead of a 3% operating surplus, what I'm now predicting, because it's April and we don't have that long until the close of the fiscal year, is conservatively a revised surplus of 1.5%. Now, I did mention earlier to Mr. Lucetti, and so I'll say this does still leave the $425,000 contingency in the budget, which we have not tapped yet at this time. So I'm hoping that through the coming weeks I can bring you good news, but I want to present something that I think is conservative but fair. And then estimated operating fund balance at the close of this year, we had projected operating fund balance at 30%. With this revision, it would now be 28%. Happy to take any questions you might have.
I have a quick question.
Of course.
So I know that our custodial cost or our cleaning costs had increased because of COVID, because of the cleaning practices. And so you said that it decreased because of staffing now. And so moving forward, so because of that, you backed out or reduced the proposed budget by, I guess, roughly about $400,000. So my question is that how is that impacting the actual cleaning, because the cleaning of the facilities, because we still have to be concerned about.
That's actually a great question. I would love not to have reduced that. So the way that our contract works is, and that might sound odd as the business manager, but and Dr. Tingley knows this, Dr. Schiffard, we've worked with ABM across all of our buildings where we wanted things cleaner. We've worked with them to make some improvements. They were very, very short-staffed. And so there was a period of time where we were working with them very intensely to help come up with creative solutions, subcontracting on their part to get the staff here. But the way our contract works with them is that we pay the monthly invoice is based on an estimate in terms of full staffing, but we pay for actual work done by actual hours worked. And so our payments each month have been lower than initially budgeted. That's why the budget numbers come down. But I think all of us would say if our buildings can be sparkling clean, we would be very happy to pay the bill in full. And they've now been creeping up that. They've been able to hire some folks. They've had some good luck with other agencies they've partnered with. And so I'm pleased to say that our buildings are in pretty good shape.
Okay, all right, just concerned, that's all.
Yep, that's a great question.
So, sorry, going back to the beginning, the one I didn't understand was in your overview, number 2, in collaboration with WRDR, the district's auditing firm, certain accounting functions should be adjusted to maintain consistency with budgeting administrative costs.
Yes.
What's happening there?
So in the state budget form, there are certain functions, specific accounts, that kind of get lumped into a bucket called administrative costs. And what's important is that your administrative costs don't increase more than 5% each year, budgeted versus prior year actual. And so in our budget this year, they did. And that's okay. We can either ask for a waiver or amend that budget accordingly. Well, part of those administrative costs, as odd as it might sound, are printers and copiers. I know that might sound odd, but that's incorporated in administrative costs. And so last year, we purchased a number of devices, and so the budget and spending was higher. That cost is not in, but that budget was inadvertently left flat this year. And so what that did is it led our administrative costs to exceed 5%. With this amendment, they won't. So it's cleaning up the functions and the accounting that go into that bucket.
Quick couple questions. When you get to the detail on page 4 and 5, where things are moving up or down, like on revenues increasing, I'm focused on transportation fees. Just logically, I would think that all boats would rise with the tide. All the feeder districts that we provide transportation for would show up on this one, but yet one of them actually shows up decreasing.
Yeah, so the way that the budgets work for them is at the close of last fiscal year, and it was convoluted further by the fact that we weren't running buses for portions of the year, so there were different refunds owed. But what we typically do, Joe, is we bill 10. We split their annual cost by 10, and they make 10 payments to us. Last year's expenses were then increased by 4% in June to give them a preliminary for this year. But then in July and August, what we did is Summit Hill was actually owed a pretty substantial refund. They were just budgeted too high, quite frankly, and overbilled. Well, in our budget for what we thought we would be getting from them this year, we did the same thing because it was carried forward flat. So I'm amending that now so it's clean, and that can better inform FY23, if that makes sense.
Yes, but then here would be my follow-up then. So then if costs are rising in transportation, you mentioned you're using a third-party firm to do some of the busing.
For some of the special education transportation, yep.
And the cost of fuel, whatever else is going up,
Yep.
wouldn't that then be passed on to the feeder? Just help me reconcile
It
that.
absolutely is. So what I did was 100%. So all transportation costs are shared proportionally. The reason Summit Hill is going down is just their proportion of that. So that's spread out evenly. And so that our costs have gone up, which is hitting our expenses.
Correct.
But in the mid-year billing, what I do in January, February is I look at the first 6 months of the fiscal year, and I look at what we project for the next 6 months. And I go back to the feeders and say, here's how we're trending. We're ahead, we're behind. And instead of saying, I said you owe us $10 for 10 months, it's $100, go ahead and pay me the 100, and then we get to the end of the year and I owe you a big refund, that doesn't make sense. I'd rather adjust in the middle and reduce that along the way, or increase it along the way. And so what we've done here for some of the feeder districts is, for all of the feeder districts, we adjusted their proportional amount that they owed, and then adjusted the pass-through costs. That's why New Lenox has gone up as much as it has. I'm sure they weren't thrilled with that. Yeah, they have the biggest percentage with us.
I had a question on this special education busing. So what is our overall budget for special education transportation?
If you give me a minute, I can pull it up, but off memory, I can tell you, I think it was
Just looking
2 point. $2 million.
Over 2 million, and we're, because 600,000 just seemed, as a percentage basis for just special education busing, and I know using a third party changes it, but that's a
And
huge
Mike
percentage.
Mike and I are meeting with the director and their business manager in the evening. Is it next week? Following?
Next week.
We've got a meeting scheduled because we have to flesh that out, Chris, because I thought the same thing. They're experiencing the shortages similar to we are, but if District 210 is the one that is carrying the burden of the third source, where the other groups are not having to go outside, then we're paying a higher portion of that. So that's definitely on our agenda with our meeting, because I said the same thing, that's completely out of whack. So they're gonna break it down for us and show us how many routes outside of our normal, because that's over a third of our budget, or a third of our budget, yes. So we'll definitely find out and get back to you on that one.
Because contractually, again, that's just shared amongst everybody participating, right?
Well, that's what we have to see, Joe, that my concern is that, okay, on these particular days, they just weren't able to fit Lincoln Way in.
Right.
So that all of that outsourced amount was billed to Lincoln Way instead of being shared, and it
So we're
should
on
be
the same
shared
page.
across the.
All right, that's right.
Yes,
Us, right.
yes, and so
Well,
my.
it is, but that's why
that's-
we agree with you.
I want to make sure that liability has
Yeah.
been shared throughout the group instead of just, well, you were the ones to utilize that service, so you were billed the extra. Correct.
Yeah, I think so. Just one more on this, the ESSER funds. Can you explain what's going on with that? Is it a timing thing, or did we actually?
Which piece about the ESSER are you referring to?
I'm at page 5, the second line. Is that a reduction in the ESSER CARES relief grant?
Oh, yeah, just a reduction in revenue, because a reduction in expenses as well. So from an ESSER standpoint, it's a timing, because remember, it's a 3-year fiscal grant. It's a timing piece, Joe, yeah. We'll just get more in FY '23. Yeah.
Just want to make sure they didn't pull it back for
No,
something.
no.
Whoever the they is. 'Cause the they is technically us, but we don't seem to have that understanding.
What's the timing on this then? So we approve this tonight, and then this goes on display? Can you
Yeah,
go over it
so it's required to be on display for 30 days. So obviously, we have more than 30 days between now and June, which is fine. And so what we'll do with board support tonight is then we'll do the typical thing. We'll get it in the newspaper, we'll put it on public display, it'll be there for at least 30 days. We'll come back in June, have a hearing, and then adopt formally the amended budget, because then that's what the state and our auditors need for the AFR.
Any other questions? All right, do we have a motion to approve the tentative amended fiscal year 2022 budget?
So move.
All right, Linda, can you please open the vote?
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, moving on to the second reading of the proposed school handbook changes.
Included in your back of materials is edits and changes, adjustments that have been approved by Lincoln Way District 210 Advisory Committee. Also, the administrative team has gone through all these revisions as well, so we would ask for a motion to approve these changes as presented.
Do we have a motion? Second? All right, any questions?
Obviously, the big change here is dress code, right?
Yep.
So let's just kind of jump to the monster in the room. And I don't think that they're bad changes, Scott. I'm looking at you directly. It goes from a very quantitative dress code to a very subjective, somewhat qualitative dress code, where in here, it's like people can, based on the judgment, the word judgment's in there a lot. And I think that's okay. And I don't have an answer, I just have the problem. And the problem is that I would encourage you to have a protocol and process so that when people's judgment is called into question, that the judgment process and protocol is fair, reasonable, and quick. Consistent's another good word, but, you know, we had things in here like 3 fingers, spaghetti straps, whatever else. I mean, those were all fascinating terms that came up in the 60s. But, and I'm the only one that could really speak to that because I was there, at least born there. But just that's the only caution I throw at it, is that when I read it, I'm like, I kept seeing the word judgment, 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 and your judgment, my judgment should be different.
I would say that that's already a problem, and that's inconsistent within the current dress code. And there are students who, despite saying, you know, fingertips or things like that, I could tell you just from, you know, speaking to all the kids and, you know, some of the ones that came here and the advisory committee, that there's a handful of kids who made it through 3/4 of the day before anyone said anything to them about anything. So I would argue that the inconsistency is already there. I think the piece that's built into this that's better is that it's going to be only a handful of administrators who will make that judgment and not individual teachers. So I think that that lessens the chance that the teachers make those judgments.
In regards to the, like, religious practices, and when we talk about, like, head wraps or for certain holidays or things like that, so how are we setting out some exceptions to those rules? Are students able to get an excuse for certain practices? So I'll give you an example. During Black History Month, some students who would like to show their appreciation, honoring the contributions, may actually wear a head wrap or something that is something that's associated with that. Is there something in here that would allow that head wrap during that month, if there, or is there a process where there could be an actual, they could place the school on notice that that's the, so that they're not called into question in regards to that?
Yes, and I think that the main thing what we were striving here is that respect element. We heard from the students who felt that even when they may have violated, may not have violated the dress code, it was the way about it was handled. And I think that that's the most important thing, is to improve upon our communication in that respect. So in the example you give, Deidre, absolutely. If students, because this is now going to be handled in the SSO office and not by deans and teachers throughout the day, that will streamline this process and make those things much more manageable, because teachers are going to know, hey, it's going to Dean X and Dean Y who are going to be the ones that are making those determinations. So yes, and I think, like I said, that our biggest thing is to improve upon the respect, and you know, I spent several years in those offices, so I know exactly what Joe's speaking to have the you know, drop your fingers down. If it's past your fingertips, that's easy, you know, and so we will have to use, you know, some quality decision-making and be consistent and be fair as we work through this process. But yes, this would lend itself to those types of activities, certainly.
I have a follow-up. So what is the process? I mean, I understand that the decision is being made by the SSO office, but what actually is the process? So would the teacher actually have to bring it to the attention? Because I know those people are not
That's kind of one of the things that we talked about, was that if a teacher suspects that there's a violation, that they would email the appropriate administrator. And then one of the other things that we talked a lot about was that students would not be missing instructional time to have this addressed. I know that a lot of the kids that spoke said that, they had been pulled during, important quizzes or things like that, or miss an important class. And so maybe it could be done during a passing period, the last few minutes of class, lunch, things like that. So that would be another avenue, but it would be only a handful of people that would be addressing this, because the other contention is that the teachers were the ones that created the distraction by addressing the dress code issues, and the clothes themselves were not actually the distraction. So this, I think, eliminates that.
Okay. The judgment thing is an issue. I'm going to tell you that, because I had a student I had a child that actually had an issue on her way to tennis practice.
Yeah.
Right. And headed out the building with the hat on out of a bathroom when no one was in the school.
Yeah.
The teacher tapped her and
Well,
just
then that
disrupted
teacher
her.
would not be doing that, like, under the new,
So as I said, it's got to go back to,
Yeah.
got to go back to that respect element. And we had talked about that. I was aware of that situation, and you're right. It's respect and understanding. Yep.
so the teachers hopefully will be, they will be,
Feedback so far has
Yes.
been mixed.
yeah, well,
I will tell you.
hopefully they know what the expectations are going
Yes.
into next school year.
Yes.
All right, so do we have a motion to approve the handbook as presented?
So,
Oh, all right, then we can open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, next up, we have the second reading for textbook adoption.
Yes, also included in your backup materials is the textbook adoption for the 22-23 school year. This fits within our 5-year plan as we've continued to cycle through new textbooks. All online resources are included with each of these purchases.
What's the process for picking these books? Is there a committee, or is it just?
There is. So the department chairs then meet with their course groups, and typically Dr. Ferry would probably go through 2, 3 different publishers in most cases to determine. But always, the teachers are always involved in that process, teachers and department chairs, yes.
All right, do we have a motion for the textbook adoption?
So moved.
Any other questions? Hearing none, Linda, can you open the vote?
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, next up is the Custodial Supplies Bid.
This is the first of 4 bids here tonight. Custodial supplies, our contract was up, and so we went out to bid. We're asking tonight that you approve bid results for fiscal year '23. Custodial supplies to multiple vendors. And we received 6 bids. No bidder, as you can see in the tabulation, provided a bid for all of the items we requested. Therefore, Interboro, Unipac, Pyramid, and Valdez all provided low bids for particular items. The district will purchase these items from these vendors, but I did confirm with legal counsel one of my concerns is just lead times, and I know that's a concern of our building supervisors as well. And so if supply chain issues create lead times and delays that aren't acceptable to us and we need the supplies, we can go get them from another vendor. And so this is not an exclusivity contract or anything like that. This is the bid. We're going to buy this amount from this vendor. But as the year goes on and as things come up, if we need something sooner and they can't deliver, that allows us to go to another vendor. But this is the request for the custodial supplies bid here tonight.
Do we have a motion? Do we have a motion to approve the Custodial Supplies Bid? No move. Do we have a second?
Second.
Chris, you have a question?
Yeah, and this isn't one for you to answer answer right now, but I think, because it's a really hard question, but this was the one that surprised me the most, because 38% seems like an awful lot. Now, 2 years ago, I would imagine it was pretty competitive, and I'm wondering if, like, 2 years ago, it was really underpriced. Because I get inflation and all that, but this one just seems to have gone up a lot more than that. There's more than inflation in this one. So I'm not asking you to go back and look, but I'd be curious as we're going through, and because I think inflation is going to play a lot into our budgeting, just taking a look at like 2 years ago versus maybe 4 years ago, and just seeing if it was just a really competitive bid, or if these things are going to start really creeping in, because this one just seemed really large to me.
Well, and we've seen some go up closer to that inflation mark. We've seen, cost of food go up, different things, but nothing like 38%.
Right.
And I'll tell you, our conversations internally, I'm just grateful that it's $67,000 on a $100 million budget instead of 10 times that. But you're right, Chris, and I'll go do some research on the history. I don't know, but this was a big increase.
So you mentioned that if we needed to purchase supplies from another vendor because of timing issues or whatnot, how would that work? Would you then come back to the board for approval, or would you just go?
No, because the amount that we would need to purchase in terms of extra would be the amount. I mean,
Small amounts probably.
Yeah, it would be nothing exceeding 25,000. It would be. We've got something coming up in the next month. We've got several events. We need a bunch of supplies, and they say we can't can liners. We can't get them for 8 weeks.
Right.
Well, okay, then we need to go find a different local vendor or somebody else that we've used, and our building supervisors know that. They actually have a vendor or two that we've had to do that with this year, where they couldn't deliver on time. So we have that kind of plan B in place.
Have we utilized all these vendors before?
We have utilized, I don't think we've utilized Unipack before. But Valdez is one that we've used the most. And they came in low on everything they bid on. They just didn't bid on all the items.
The can liners.
Yeah.
So that brings up just two observations. I agree with you. This is a lot of conversation for a $65,000 line item. But one was there was a lot of no bids. I mean, when you go across, you took the low bid. Well, we took the only bid.
Yep.
So low and only. And then the other thing would be, so they bid it, and let's say hypothetically, then they can't get it because they really couldn't get it for $20 or whatever they bid it at. Is there anything punitive or anything that we can get back from them saying, hang on, we took your bid at $20, and all of a sudden you're telling me, oh, it's a 12-week lead, because to get it for $20, it comes, truly on the slow boat from China.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any pushback on it? Because some of these are, not only was it 38%, but the low bid was half of what some of the other bids were. Not in this particular one, but I'm just kind of going forward.
Sure.
Is there anything that says, hey, you bid $20, now I had to go out and get it at 35? You got to make up my $15 per unit cost here.
It's a great question. I'll look into it.
Okay. Wasn't supposed to be a homework assignment.
That's okay. That's okay.
I know.
I can speak to some of that for the other bids. Yeah.
Any further questions? Can you open the vote?
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, next up, we have the solid waste removal and recycling garbage.
So for this one right now, we use Republic and Homewood, and it's split across our sites. So we have 2 vendors for different portions of the district. That contract's coming to an end, so we needed to bid this as well. And this is for the next 3 fiscal years, fiscal year 23 through 25. And then one of the things that we added in the bid specs this year was the option to give us a percentage at our sole discretion for years 4 and 5 if the district is interested. And so they provided a percentage there. 5 bids were submitted. Chris, I think this might be one of the ones you were referring to where there's an anomaly. I did speak with the rep from Environmental, just that their bid was so much higher. And he said, yeah, I think the other 4 bidders did not factor in the cost of equipment. Obviously, you know that trucks and vehicles and all the equipment right now is way backloaded. We're going to need more equipment if we won the bid to take on your services. Whereas Republic's already got the business, they've already got the equipment, I think is the difference there. So, winning bidder for all 4 school buildings was Republic, and then Midwest Paper Retriever won the small amount for the transportation center. So we'll remain split, but Republic won most of them. And happy to take any questions if you have it.
Are there any variable, like fuel surcharges or anything baked into this?
Mm-mm.
So this is it. So gas goes to $20 a gallon.
This is it.
That's what, okay. I didn't predict.
Because they bid per trip. You know, they bid per trip. It's a great question.
Any other questions? All right, do we have a motion? Rick, can you open the vote?
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, next up, we have the landscape service bid.
Request tonight to award a landscape services contract to Brightview. We currently partner with Brightview, and they were the low bidder. They do all of our weekly tasks: fertilizer, weed control, trimming of trees and shrubs, edging. We buy our mulch, but then they come and spread it. So all of the ground services. Brightview does a really nice job for us now, and they've actually been really great to collaborate with over the last couple of weeks as we've tried to hone in on our own internal communication in this department in terms of prepping for the spring. But as you can see in the tabulation, they were the low bidder in all of the services and sites. The different services vary, but this is more in line of what I would think an inflationary increase would be given the market right now, and this is about 5% over this year's cost.
All right, do we have a motion to approve the landscape bid? Do we have a second? Any questions? Hearing none. Linda, can you open the vote?
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, next up, we have the asphalt maintenance and seal coating bid.
So, request tonight to award the asphalt maintenance and seal coating contract to Dendler. We have partnered with Dendler before. They were the winner of the previous bid as well. This is another one where we only received 2 bids, and they were pretty discrepant from one another. But Dendler has done work for us before, and again, in this arena, it really has a lot to do with how much work they've already contracted and how hungry they are for more, or if they're just throwing a high bid at it because they're already pretty full. But Dendler was significantly lower than McGill Construction, which was the other bid that we received. And so we have seal coating. It's Central, East, West, and Transportation slated for this summer.
Do we have a motion to approve the asphalt maintenance and seal coating bid? All right, any questions? All right, hearing none. Linda, can you open the vote?
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, next up is the Quad Plus abatement.
So Quad Plus is something that the board heard about in 2019, and there's an attachment to this agenda item that was their request for a partial tax abatement back in August of 2019. And so that was heard by this board then, and the Will County Center for Economic Development and the Will County Clerk's Office both recommended the taxing districts pass more detailed tax abatement agreements that clearly set out the terms and say that Quad Plus must meet certain requirements before that abatement can go into effect, and you approved that agreement in November of 2019. That's the background. All I'm asking here tonight is that I was contacted by the clerk's office, as was Lennox 122, the other taxing bodies as well, requesting a separate directive resolution passed ordering the county clerk to abate for this year. And then that would become something annually for the life of such agreement. And so in this case, it is a 50% of the 2021 tax year's amount collected in 2022 for Quad Plus LLC. And as I mentioned, District 122 approved the same resolution at its monthly meeting in March.
All right, do we have a motion to approve the abatement? Joe? No, we don't even have a motion yet. Do we have a second? All right, any questions? So why are we doing this just for this year? We already approved the abatement 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
What you approved was an agreement to abate. And so now what the county clerk's office is requesting of, it's really a formality, and it's quite a bit of technicality that. So the way that the county clerk's office explained it to me was the way that the agreement in 2019 was worded, and again, not just for Lincoln Way, but for a variety of taxing bodies, was verbiage similar to, if Quad Plus meets such and such requirements, then the abatement will go into place. And so the clerk's office said, well, that places the burden of evaluating that on us, the clerk's office, when the agreement is really between you, the taxing body, and Quad Plus. And so it's really up to you, the taxing body, to evaluate that Quad Plus has met those requirements, which they now have, and to then direct us annually to abate the amount in that agreement.
So what was the build a 52,000 square foot building?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I was informed by the Center for Economic Development in the county clerk's office that they have, yes. Where in here does it say that they've done all this? I mean, like, they've built it, they've employed the people. I mean, if it's in here, I'm just not seeing it. But. Yeah, that's okay. It's not listed in the resolution as an explicit, but like what those items are. But in terms of the Center for Economic Development and Clerk's Office, the building, the employment of the people, the different steps that they had to take to qualify, and that's under the tax abatement program guidelines from the county.
Page 2 has their, estimated property taxes completed by the project, and so they have the building now. Back in 2019, it was still a plan.
Yes.
And how many years are we? So I guess my question is, every year are they going to ask us to vote on it? I'd rather have them say that they met it every. I'd rather vote on it once a year. And have
the request is annual voting. Yeah, the request, it's a 5-year, 50% tax abatement program. And so what the request of the board would be is annually to then direct it for that upcoming levy. It's just like the tax levy
based on the
annual.
So every year they'll ask us to vote on it after they said they met all the guidelines.
Correct.
Okay.
because they
Yeah,
had to
and
build
it's on, it's actually, if you go to, you know, what is it, attachment B, it's the second attachment, and it tells you that the proposed project is to retain 80 jobs, add another 50 jobs. I don't want to overly debate this type of thing, but I mean, they come to us saying, well, you should approve something that we're not taking accountability for, but they did it. Is that really what this summarizes?
So maybe next year they can actually,
Or summarize something and
I would be happy.
here's my answer, 5, show me your work, I don't have to show you my work.
I would be happy to get, no, I think it's a great point. I'd be happy to get some additional information from them and some supporting documents that we can share with the board. Similar to the tax levy, and Rich, to your point earlier, just like the tax levy is an annual thing that the board has to approve before tax bills are calculated. This abatement, the resolution needs to be done annually because then it impacts the upcoming year's bills. That's the recommendation from the Will County Clerk's Office.
yeah, we have a motion and second, so if there aren't any more questions, Linda, can you open the vote?
Vote is open.
It's 3-3.
Hold on, that's not what I wanted to hit, sorry. There's no backup, right? You vote for something.
Well, if there's not a business, if you
So you want to make a motion to delay this for a month?
So that's a great question, and I asked that same question. I was informed of this because I wasn't aware of any of this, and I was informed by the clerk's office, and in order to make May tax bills, it needs to be approved tonight.
But remember, we get 50% of whatever that tax happens to be, right? So their estimate in here, it's $4,700. We get $4,700 based upon their estimates. So we're going to get 50% of whatever the tax assessor says. That's what that should be assessed at for the Lincoln portion. Correct. So the estimate would be $4,700. You know, if without the abatement, then the estimate, you know, would be twice that, just shy of 10,000. So it's, you know, 6 of one, half dozen the other in terms of what we're looking at. I think the motivation when they came to the board was, you know, we're looking for incentives to go ahead and start this company. The economic development wouldn't be bringing it back if there weren't a building and there weren't a taxable body now, because there were no taxes prior. Correct. So that's kind of the thought. Now, to your point, are there $87,000? Is it an $87,000 job on the floor? We don't know. Are there 80 people employed? We don't know. But we'll get 50% of whatever that assessment would be. I would think if we don't vote, you know, without an abatement, they may have to pay 100, but then they can go back on that resolution that we passed, that the board passed in 2019.
I mean, I remember the resolution because they were going to move the tax. They were going to move the taxes, or there was a potential they were looking at taxes and somewhere else. So I mean, I remember it, and I don't want. But again, to the point, like, have they confirmed what? I mean, what was said?
I was told they have met all of the requirements.
Well, we can make a new motion to, you know, not vote, I guess.
They can't get the tax on that, and then that could hurt future development too, if you start. But could you ask them to please, like, give us a checklist? Yeah, we could certainly ask for a summary before going to a second year. But I agree, I think our bridge for the $4,700. Right, correct. You know, and we get a checklist before years 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and I kind of anticipate them probably trying to go past year 6 at some point, but go a year at a time. For sure. Yeah, we need backup.
We'll do this, but we want more. Yeah. Okay. All right.
So the vote is still open.
vote is 5 ayes and 1 abstain for Mr. Kirking. The motion passes.
All right, moving on to informational items, we have the report of the Lincoln Way Special Education District 843 Governing Board meetings held March 22nd, 2022.
Scott actually attended, I believe, on my behalf.
Nothing additional to report that's not in the minutes.
We have FOIA requests.
Once again, the FOIAs are in your backup materials for your review.
And then we have our buildings and ground report.
Yeah, thank you to Mike and Kelly for helping put that together. The timing of that, it was requested at our last meeting that this is something we continue, and we will continue to do that.
And just, obviously, our condolences to Rich's family. It's first meeting without him here to present this report, so. Moving on to the community relations report.
Jen Bashansky has really done a nice job with this. If you have a moment to take a look, that's in your backup materials. She does a really nice job of highlighting some of the things going on within each of our schools in the district.
We have the asset of the month.
Asset of the month for May. Optimism. A young person is optimistic about his or her own future. At home, don't dismiss your child's dream as naive or unrealistic. Encourage them to tell you their dreams. At school, encourage and support students in pursuing those dreams. In the community, help young people to set personal goals and inspire hope.
We have the establishment of insurance subfund.
Go ahead, Mr. Durock.
Sure, so obviously, as we've been talking about medical claims, we had 4 consecutive years where premiums exceeded claims, and it's, now that we're self-insured, it's not uncommon to see that go the other way once in a while, and so this is our bad year. But one of the things that's very important to us administratively is to be able to track very carefully employee and employer contributions, insurance fund balances, and claims data so that we can adjust the budgets in future years and make appropriate adjustments in October to future premium rates. And so in Illinois School Code, in ISB's Illinois Program Accounting Manual, money meant to be used exclusively for medical insurance can still be accounted for under the education fund, but a sub-fund can be created. And so what I've done is consulted both our auditors and legal counsel, and as an accounting mechanism, and you might see in here Fund 12, and that might seem odd why I'm not choosing Fund 11, but in the Program Accounting Manual, Fund 11 is sometimes referred to. We use 99 for Student Activity Fund. Some districts use 11, and so I didn't want that to be any confusion, hence 12. And so in terms of the audit, the AFR, it's still part of our operating revenues and expenses. Nothing changes in terms of that. But what it allows us just on a day-to-day accounting basis is to create a sub-fund so that everything can be tracked in terms of medical, dental, vision, and life insurance. And so that we can see that fund balance, we can better track both the employee and employer contributions. We do that now to a degree because we pay all the claims out of the education fund. And so we do payroll transfers for those staff whose payroll deductions happen in O&M and transportation. And so this just kind of formalizes that. And I'm pleased to say that our auditing firm, WRDR, also said that they would be happy to put kind of like a footnote and a separate schedule in the audit for us to be able to see how we've performed. So this is something that we recommend establishing. It does not require board action because we're not establishing a brand new fund. This is just a sub-fund within education, again, just for an accounting formality. Yeah, I just think it's the best way to track, and it's very transparent. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. Next up is the legislative report.
Just included in your backup report, the capital watch from the latest session. Nothing earth-shattering for us. We'll just continue to monitor all the activity in Springfield.
I did have a question. So there's talk of this tax relief. I know it's election year, all that stuff, but the property tax relief that is being thrown by, I haven't really
election cycle where they haven't discussed it. So I'm not really in tune to the new variables. Mike, do you have anything to add to some of the new discussion?
No, nobody in my circles has been talking about this, that it has legs, so to speak. I think it's something, you talk property tax freeze, you talk pension cost shift. These are things that get mentioned pretty consistently, especially during election cycles. I've not heard anything new or different that would suggest that we as a district need to be, preparing for some kind of budgetary impact. If that changes, Dr. Tingley and myself would obviously bring that to you guys.
I have a quick question. Recently, there was some news about the Chicago Public Schools got an exorbitant amount of extra money that was going to be redistributed. Is any of that money, are we on the list for redistribution?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Go ahead, Mike. What was the amount?
About $370,000, give or take, which is good. So it's about 90 grand for each of the 4 years that have gone by that we've quote unquote been shorted. I did reach out to the state and say, okay, the way that evidence-based funding works is whatever your allocation is the following year, that's your base funding minimum. You can't get less, even if they don't fund the additional money. It's not like our base funding minimum is going to go up $350. They've not yet released the data on what our new base will be, but I'm guessing it's somewhere like 90 grand higher because that would have been the calculation otherwise. But we are getting now about 370. We actually just learned that, and actually we learned that right at the end of last week, right? And that was after this memo was done, and so that's another piece that we'll include in the budget. So
it was the third-party vendor whose formula evidently was allocated that money.
That's right. Next up is the superintendent's district report.
Mike Kelly and I will meet with Moody's, I believe on the 27th, if I'm not mistaken, to, now that we're going to market, there will hopefully be a rating increase, but we'll be meeting with Moody's as they had said all along when they didn't want to rate us in the winter. They probably would once we, got ready to move forward on the selling of the bonds. So we'll meet with them next week and see what the outcome of that is. And then, as Aaron mentioned, on April 1st, we lost a member of our Lincoln family. Rich served this community. Rich Wilkie served this community for 31 years. He will be impossible to be replaced. He is missed every day. And we all ask that our thoughts and prayers continue to be with the Wilkie family at this time. He was certainly a good one and will be missed.
Any other district business to report? We have our mitigation plan.
Mitigation plan on there. We updated some of the school bus writing plans, so everything is with the latest current up-to-date information.
Any correspondence?
None.
All right. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn to closed session for the purposes of discussing collective bargaining, employment, and all the other items listed on here. There's a lot of them there.
So, I was looking for the highlighted sheet.
Yeah, I don't have the highlighted sheet in front of me, so
Not a problem.
I can read 1 through 13.
It'll be appointment, employment compensation, discipline, performance, and or dismissal of employees, and collective negotiating.